Finnerty. A member of Sinn Féin has taken a High Court action against RTE over the station's refusal to broadcast interviews with him solely because he belongs to Sinn Féin. Our Legal Affairs correspondent, Kieran Wood.
During the dispute at the Gatto Bakery in Finglas last summer, the chairman of the strike committee was Mr. Larry O'Toole of Darndale, a member of Sinn Féin. He was interviewed on several occasions for RTE television and radio about the strike. One interview was broadcast on 2FM radio, but thereafter RTE refused to broadcast any further interviews with Mr. O'Toole because he was a member of Sinn Féin, and such a broadcast would have been contrary to Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act. In court this morning, barrister Mr. Frank Clark for Mr. O'Toole said Mr. O'Toole's application didn't contest the validity of Section 31. He said Mr. O'Toole was a member of the National Executive of the Bakery Union, and while he didn't claim any natural right to be interviewed on RTE, he did claim the right not to be arbitrarily excluded by a blanket ban on all members of Sinn Féin. RTE's Director of News, Mr. Joe Mulholland, in a statement read to the court, said the Broadcast Act banned interviews with anyone who was a member of Sinn Féin or thought to be a member of Sinn Féin. He said it would be impossible to have individual editors making their own decisions about whether the subject of an interview with a member of Sinn Féin was able to be broadcast or not. That could result in interviews going out on one radio channel and being banned on another radio channel. He said for that reason RTE had a corporate interpretation which resulted in the order being applied uniformly throughout the station and banning all interviews with members of Sinn Féin no matter what the subject.
Radio Television Éireann. Friday's edition of 6-1 News is presented now by John Finnerty.
Minister O'Malley publishes interim report into the telecom affair. High Court says RTE was wrong not to broadcast interviews with member of Sinn Féin.
Minister publishes interim telecom report and freezes some shares in United Property Holdings. Sinn Féin man wins Section 31 case in High Court against RTE. Ireland's Sonia O'Sullivan in the final as she wins her Olympic heat. The High Court has ruled that RTE was wrong not to broadcast interviews with a member of Sinn Féin during a strike 2 years ago. The station claimed it couldn't interview a union official, Mr. Larry O'Toole, because that would be a breach of Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act.
Larry O'Toole was a member of the Bakery Union's National Executive during the Gatto strike in 1990. He was also a member of Sinn Féin. RTE interviewed him 6 times. The station broadcast one radio interview, but refused to broadcast the rest because of his membership of Sinn Féin. Mr. O'Toole claimed RTE's action was a misconstruction of Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act. Today, the High Court ruled Mr. O'Toole was correct and RTE was wrong. Mr. Justice Rory O'Hanlon said RTE's statutory obligation to present news and current affairs in an impartial way would be breached if the station, on its own initiative, decided not to allow interviews with people based on race, colour or creed. The judge said the station would have to solve its administrative difficulties in some way other than by imposing a blanket ban on interviews with members of Sinn Féin. After the hearing, Mr. O'Toole said the High Court decision would have important and beneficial effects for members of Sinn Féin involved in community and trade union affairs. Sinn Féin Vice President Pat Doherty said the ruling represented a victory for free speech. The Dublin Broadcasting Branch of the National Union of Journalists said the decision bore out what the union had consistently argued, that RTE's interpretation of Section 31 was unnecessarily restrictive and prevented journalists carrying out their work in a balanced and impartial manner. But a spokesman for RTE said it would continue its existing editorial practices until there'd been a review of the implications of the judgment.
The National Union of Journalists has welcomed the judgment and said it would be asking RTE for a review of current guidelines. Austin Curry of Fine Gael said the Minister for Communications should clarify the position so that journalists in particular are aware of the guidelines. Labour's spokesman on communications, Jim Kemmy, said the Minister should ensure an individual's right to freedom of speech within the law. And Francesca Rossa of Democratic Left said only those who advocate violence should come under the remit of Section 31. The British Home Office has ruled out a full public hearing by the judicial inquiry into the Guildford and Woolwich pub bombings. The Home Office said the decision was taken to avoid further delay in publishing the findings of Sir John May's inquiry. The Home Office also said public hearings could not be held until after the trial of 3 Surrey police officers who are accused of conspiring to pervert the course of justice. That case isn't expected to begin until next year. The Labour MP, Mr Chris Mullen, has condemned the decision. The situation was most unsatisfactory. A husband and wife convicted of killing a Garda in 1975 have been freed on parole. Noel Murray, seen here leading a Supreme Court hearing last year, has served 17 years in prison for the murder of off-duty Garda Michael Reynolds. Murray's wife, Mary, who was also sentenced to life imprisonment for the crime, has also been freed. Last year, the couple from Selbridge in County Kildare lost an appeal to be allowed to start a family in prison. The Department of Justice says strict conditions have been attached to their parole. In London, the High Court has fined Channel 4 Television and an independent production company, Box Productions, £75,000 for contempt of court. The companies had made and transmitted a documentary in the Dispatches series featuring an informant who claimed there was collaboration between the IUC and loyalist paramilitaries, leading to the assassination of Republicans. They refused to obey a court order to identify their informant to the authorities, claiming...
The High Court has ruled that RTE was wrong not to broadcast interviews with Sinn Féin during a strike 2 years ago. RTE claimed it couldn't interview Mr Larry O'Toole during the Gatto bakery strike because it would be a breach of Section 31 of the Broadcasting Act. There have been calls from opposition TDs for the government to clarify the Section 31 issue. The British Home Office has ruled out a full public hearing by Sir John May's judicial inquiry into the 1974 Guildford and Woolwich pub bombings. The Home Office said the decision was taken to avoid further delay in publishing the findings of the inquiry. Noel Murray and his wife Mary, who were convicted of killing a Garda in 1975, have been freed on parole. The Department of Justice said strict conditions have been attached to their release. Channel 4 Television and Box Productions have been fined £75,000 by the High Court for contempt of court. This follows their refusal to disclose their source for a documentary programme alleging links between the security forces in the north and loyalist death squads. 8 firebombs went off in a shopping centre at Milton Keynes in Buckinghamshire overnight. Police said they are not excluding the IRA from suspicion.